I remember Mr. Gammell, the gentleman with whom I studied in the critical moment in my training, uh, besides saying that he considered Degas always interesting, um, which is a remarkable thing to say about a painter. There's many, many painters who are not always interesting. Many good, I'm talking about top painters, who don't hold our interest as well. And he also said that he believed that Degas was going to be a good, uh, you know, study. That is, say, it would reap benefits to those who study. The study of Degas would reap benefits. People who do it would reap benefits, I guess I better say. So you guys keep tempting me to look at Degas, and here I go again. But so thank you very much for you, Bryan B and Tfoerdezmo. If that's what these are just the calling cards I get. If you guys ever want me to use your real names, you might want to put those down somewhere. I don't mind doing that. By the way, I also wouldn't mind if you would, when you send comments to me, if you want me to use, or even donations, if you want me to use your full names, tell me. I'll be happy to do it. I'm very grateful, especially for the donations. And again, I'll thank you all for subscribing, sharing, donating, and the comments in particular that we derive these videos from. Um, I do look forward to, if you've heard, to digging in on some of the points that you may have heard reference to in a more broad way or as part of a larger number of points. I have no problem with digging in on certain individual points, which is what you see me doing a lot more of right now in the last few videos. So otherwise, I'm sort of on my own. So the more you could actually give me what's happening with you, the better. I just got a very good email comment from someone. Um, what was your name? Martino, I think. That is, it's just the kind of stuff I'm looking for. It talks about how he's trying to work out what I'm talking about, and then he had further questions about it. And these particular questions related to Degas' comments again on site size, other things. Those aren't the things I'm dealing with on this one. But and again, about Degas, I want to say the Shoptalk, when Gammell handed that to us, he'd written it in 1961. So I finally got to Gammell in 1976. First heard of him, I think, in 1975, and got into his studio in 1976. And when he handed that book to us, it was like to die for. There's so much data. At that time, I didn't really know the difference between reading about Degas and reading what Degas said. Such a crucial thing to begin to understand how important that is. And the second best, to after getting the words of the guy himself, the painter himself that you respect. And Gammell, by the way, attributes Ingres, Degas, and Leonardo da Vinci with being the three primary sources. You've probably noticed that comment if you've read this book. But the other thing, besides just getting the horse's mouth itself, is getting an interpretation via another painter who has some skills. And Gammell is that guy. So the Shop Talk of Edgar Degas, I've said before, I have it for you if you want it. Feel free to ask me for it. In the meantime, let's dig in on the question that Tfoerdezmo begins with. I think I'm going to call you T-Ford from this point on. Sir or ma'am. Further to clarify my comment on imagination and Degas, he at one point states that what makes a good painting is when you rely on your memory rather than drawing from life. In this way, that which strikes your eyes, the accents that are most attractive to you and worth remembering, is what infuses the painting with your touch and individuality. I interpreted this as a limited role of imagination. He was also quoted in Shop Talk and other sources as advising young artists, despite relying on models at times, to never paint directly from nature or life. Interesting thoughts. And I think the thoughts was actually my phrase. I forget what he said. He was asking me what my thoughts were. I'm shortening it for this, to get this lettering bigger on this page here. But I think as Gammell would say, you precisely misunderstand Degas. His comment there, I'm going to show it to you actually. I think I have it here. Degas says it's very well to copy what you see. So there you are, copying from nature, drawing what you see, in other words. It's much better to draw what you only see in memory. Now, what he's saying here is that there's a transformation during which the imagination works in conjunction with the memory. You only put down what made an impression on you. That is to say, the essential. Now, the essential is way different from accents that are sort of unique to you. You'll be having to deal with this, and I'm speaking as a person who's done memory drawing. What you'll wind up with is things will fall away. The little things that don't matter worth anything, the insignificant things, including just low-level contrasts, things made out of low-level value differences. And you'll see that in Degas' work, how profoundly big his form is as the little things fall away. So think again about that comment that you made there. It's not a question of getting uniqueness and sort of something peculiar to yourself as much as getting to the essentials. So your comment was that the accents are most attractive to you and worth remembering. Now, worth remembering is a good point, if that's what you mean by that. But accents is a very curious point. And I think you don't mean accents as in some odd little highlight somewhere. But of course, Degas is always talking about the greater form. Was it also Ang who said, "Why do you make that out of three little forms when you could just easily make it out of one great one?" That's what infuses that conversation. And what happens in memory is you stop seeing like all the little ones, but somehow or other you will tend to pick up those major ones. I found personally. So I don't think of this as a limited role of imagination at all. I think of this as simply a way of diminishing non-essentials. And but anyway, so then he was also quoted in Shoptalk and other sources as advising young artists to never paint directly from nature or life. Now you can see in that very next quote, he does simply say, "It's very well to copy what you see." But then he talks about later on, he says, then your memory and your invention are freed from the dominating influence of nature. So that invention part, of course, again, has to do with what's needed for your picture. And I think some of what he means by that comes up. The idea of creating fascinating patterns. If you're stuck with just copying nature and you're afraid to change something, and that literally means you're afraid to change something that would improve the pattern that makes the imagery fascinating and improves that. That would be a bad thing. Because if you're so dominated by nature that all you can produce is a photograph, essentially, what is that? Okay. That's why pictures made by a man with a trained memory who knows thoroughly both the masters and his own craft are almost always remarkable works. For instance, Delacroix. I think another example of that might be Legros. You might look at his work to see how remarkably big it looks. There isn't a great body to look at of his work, but that's another person who probably studied with Lecoq and doing memory drawing. I think that's all I can offer you just now on that subject. I did want to go back for a second and just point out there are a couple other books. The one on the right is the lesser of the two. Ruart talking about Degas, In Search of a Technique. He's the guy who said, I never arrived. I'm glad I never found my way, my path. So in particular, that would be particular to technique. I never found that precise technique. He does do things that are pretty much the same all the time, and I'm going to show you where he tells you what those things are in terms of how he makes a picture. At least according to Rothenstein. But then there's the one by Degas by himself, which is full of his quotes. And that book is, I think I saw it on the shelf on a used bookshelf for $3 or $5 recently. So that's one that's worth having in your library. It also shows the breadth of his form, the bigness of his form, how it's not made of 1,000 little things, the kind of stuff that when you're memorizing, you're going to make sure you get. And the little ones you won't remember because they won't have participated in the greater unity or greater impression. So I've recently finished. This is not Brian's comment, and this is me doing pickup, as you can see, on Degas. I've just recently finished reading the Shoptalk of Edgar Degas. Absolutely fantastic book. There's a specific passage in the book that really caught my eye. Allow students to paint only images reflected in mirrors to instill a detestation of the trompe l'oeil. Now that is really, really directed. Well, I tried this out myself and found the effect quite flattening. It felt like painting from a pre-recorded video or a photo. I found it a strange thing. Now, boy, that one surprises me unless you do something to the photo to make it do that. I find that most people look into photographs much worse than they look into nature itself frequently. So look in means you're zooming in and taking every thousand little things, taking every little thing in sight. And that is sort of in the nature of what the fool of the eye painter does. He's actually trying to make greater and greater realism right down to the head of a pin, so that you feel like that's a head of a pin there, and that sort of thing when you see it sticking out. And Pito and a few other Americans, was Frankenstein one, I'm trying to remember who else, and then there's a number of Trompe painters in France. Trompe, the sort of fool of the eye, Trompe l'oeil, yeah. So allow students to paint only images reflected in mirrors to instill a detestation of the Trompe l'oeil. That's good. The concept is, though, one where it wasn't like he tried all these things out necessarily, but he comes up with ideas like the fifth floor. We have the model on the first floor and the most advanced students on the fifth floor. These are conceptual. These are intended to convey an idea. So, but anything you can do to see the painting as flatter. Now, what in the heck does that mean, right? Does that mean we want to paint like, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute. Do we want to paint and flatten out images like we're making posters? Because that's about as flat as you can get. I'll show you one of the America Cassattes like that. But he said, I found it a strange thing to advise to students, and I agree with you on that one. But the idea of painting flat, so we are really trying to see the world as if it were two-dimensional, as a matter of interpretation. We're trying to see the world as if we're already a painting. And that really is a crucial use of your imagination. That's a key skill, too. And for us to be able to preconceive this as a painting will keep us in the world of values, colors, and placements, and so on, right? And it'll keep us in a world of unified relationships, not zooming in here and zooming in there and zooming all over the place, which the guy with really vivid or really powerful eyesight, farsightedness, what we call that, or just really sharp eyes, he'll tend to trust his zooming skills. Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. And then the idea is that a painting is a whole bunch of zoomed in spots. Well, what happens when you can't zoom in, when you have a screen in front of you, the mirror, you feel less of a tendency to try to zoom in because it's almost fruitless. It'll hurt your eyes, so to speak. He talks about that. But so not injure them, but cause pain or headaches. So, but the idea of seeing flat, and then the second reason for that we'll talk about in a minute, and that is the idea of the flattening that Degas believed was a function, like the low relief was a function of good painting, which is an interesting discussion, but not a given to the greater world of painters at large, particularly the realists. But this seems to pair nicely with his belief that drawing should be low, relief, flat, something he must have picked up from Ang without a doubt. I wanted to know your thoughts on this practice, and if it's really worth bothering with. I've painted in mirrors, and my eyes are weak enough already, so I don't find it any advantage to try to paint myself like a self-portrait in a mirror. I don't find that as a thing that's. But on the other hand, I didn't embrace this when I needed the help, when I needed to learn to see the world as if it were flat. I just concluded that I need to use my imagination and look at the world, and flat meant as if it were already a painting to me. And that seemed to do everything that Degas wants. But again, one of the things you always want to be aware of when you're talking about what somebody said multiple generations before you, even if he's being interred by somebody just one or two generations before you, is that we can't know precisely what he meant unless there's somebody else there with more context. And that's one of the things we just don't have enough of. And we have, in fact, many times you have context with Degas, you just have no end of contradiction. So here we pick up, and this is along the similar lines, and I'm going to show you pictures after this. But there's Tfoerd goes on and says, 2 questions I'd love for you to potentially discuss in a further episode regarding Degas in the Shoptalk. In it, Degas mentions observe without drawing and draw without observing. Now, I didn't find that quote in there, T. Ford. I don't think that quote exists. I didn't believe it existed when you said it. So I don't know where you got that. So that's one where you may want to show us the source and have us review the translation if it's actually something he said. I can imagine. I mean, he's the observer, and Degas and Ang is the same way. Drawing without observing, I don't know what that would be. So I don't know what that whole general conversation is. But what are your thoughts regarding this dictate, and and its reliance on memory and imagination? So memory requires observation. It requires good observation. You have to have good eyes. It's about your memory. It's about what you remember seeing. So there are two kinds of uses of memory I've said before. One is just simply memorizing. I mean, painting what you remember, like making up figures out of your head and doing the best you can. And that's use of your total memory. And then there's another one, which is what we do with Lecoq, and that is try to memorize what you see in front of you, the way it looks exactly. And there's no question that Degas was into that training, and as I've been as myself. So, and I've shown you, and if you go look around, you'll see some of the stuff I've done with that kind of work, both from photographs and from life. So, so relying on memory and imagination. I don't know, that's imagination. It has everything to do with the fact that you're putting pictures together. But even when he says imagination, Degas always is telling you, but make sure it looks like it, make sure it's convincing so it doesn't look like it's something imaginary you're throwing in there. So, well, whatever you want to make of that. But what I would recommend in all this stuff is make good use of what you can grasp of these things. And you can wonder about the rest, and I know that's why you're throwing it out there. But stay within yourself. Stay with where you are. Get what you can from this stuff in a very useful way, and be practical. Most painters are very pragmatic. It has very specific application, and I think that's why I don't like the idea that Degas wasn't being realistic. I think Gammell almost says that when he talks about the fifth floor. It's not about being realistic. It's about talking about the nature of the thing. And you got to know the difference between when a painter is saying, let's do, and by the way, I'm not saying he is or isn't in this case, but he never tried it out. He never did try out the fifth floor, except that to the extent that you could say that when he went to the opera, he looked through glasses. And then he did study. Sometimes he would do scribbles, like cartoon scribbles, and when he went home, though, he would also do it. And I've done that myself, at least in a single event or a couple, where I was watching the orchestra and the performers and all that sort of stuff, and was learning what I saw in front of me, and then taking it home with me. But reliance on memory and imagination, basing that on the previous quote, though, I don't know where to take it. So. But secondly, could you potentially interpret, I don't know why I bolded this, you didn't bold it. Second, could you potentially interpret what Degas meant when he criticized painters for painting inflated? And again, I couldn't find that term in Gammell's book on Degas, and praised them for painting flat. So that's what I'm going to talk about, the difference between flat, and I think the inflated one probably has to do with the realism of the Courbet camp. Which was that realism we've talked about before here, that has to do with virtual Trump. But he's praising them for painting flat. My sense is that he discusses the volume of figures. He's discussing the volume of figures, but not sure. So now that's a place where I would suggest to you he's talking about just the opposite. He draws his figures. He brings out his figures. He really articulates the form into your space. He's really definitely a 3D guy when it comes to drawing the figure. I think that's what most of us consider to be draftsmanship, is to be able to project the idea of the third dimension on two dimensions. Degas' comment was drawing is the interpretation of form. And form, you could say it means shape, but he then argues that it's not just shape. Who is it also, Ang? But it's not just shape, but it's what happens. That's actually, somebody even quotes, I think I have that quote here, where Degas talks about the form. Ang talks about the form, the way we really think of it, which is the rounding, which is the part that isn't 2D, but it certainly incorporates the shape itself and the curves. But this is in the context of praising Zaloga for his flatness. Maybe you could find and share the thread that links his favorite artists and their supposed flat painting style. Now, I didn't find that that was true either, T. Ford. So I recommend if you've read Degas once, you read him like 3 times. I like C.S. Lewis's comment that you haven't read a book if you haven't read it 3 times. Somebody sent me a nice link to a Jordan Peterson conversation with a couple other guys, I think one of which is an artist and the other maybe a philosopher. And I listened to it once, and I picked up quite a lot. And I said, "There's no way I've heard this yet." And I took the same attitude as you, that I really am going to have to listen to this 3 times. And by the way, it had a number of things related to the arts. Sorry, I can't tell you what that is, but if somebody wanted it, they could ask me online, and I would, online or on the internet, and I would be happy to send by email, and I'd be happy to send you what I have. But the volume of figures and flatness are 2 very separate things. So let's just talk about some of that stuff with some images in front of us. Probably nobody, there's probably no better example of the 2 ideas than right here. This is Velázquez. The first one on the left is the flat world. This is the world that everybody understood to be the way painting worked, rather. Everything was assumed to be, a bunch of stuff sort of in the front plane, like bas-relief, and the background was like a cloth dropped down behind it. You've seen movie makers. I think Alfred Hitchcock does that in one of his movies, Marnie maybe, which are visually fascinating frequently. But it's the sea when you go down to where the woman's mother lives. The sea in the background, the shipyard, appears to be a flat screen. Very curious, and he does it a couple times. It creates very curious effects on your mind. But the one on the left is clear to the flat one. The one on the right is the classic poking holes of the canvas. So here is, remember, everything representational painters are doing is trying to get us closer to the truth via the nature, but via the look of it, the appearances, right? And there's something about painting the painting on the left side that may have been satisfying to the history guys, or even to the 2-dimensional design guys, but it wasn't satisfying. Obviously, it wasn't ultimately satisfying to the truth seeker that made Velázquez who he was. So these are the 2 kinds of paintings. Now, I'm not called the one on the right realism. That's actually what we call impressionism. So that's left flat, right. Shall we just say not flat for now? Now, would you say inflated? I wonder what Degas would say. He doesn't ever decry Velázquez. He says a lot of trashy things have been done in his name, but we don't know what he's talking about. But so I'm just jumping you straight over to the Mary Cassatt and down below, which is that I said it's like a poster cutout. That's flatter than flat, right? But there's Ang on the right, Degas on the left, upper. Both of them are models of this thing. Both of them are articulating beautiful form in the figure itself. And everything else is an attempt to maintain a kind of flatness, a kind of low relief, a kind of not going in. So I do wonder when I look at these whether that whole idea is related to the world of fresco and wall design, because that's a classic concept in wall design, is to not be poking holes in the wall and wrecking what the architect is trying to do. And so the flatness idea, where you even exaggerate the outline, to make it flatter yet, to make it into flat units, flat units all over the place, is a thing. Look at Blatchfield and others. Blatchfield's a great American. Even you find Sargent doing it in his murals in Boston at the public library. There again, I have that Mary Cassatt, and you can see that could easily be done as a wall decoration. By the way, Degas did say at one point that he was sad that nobody had ever given him an opportunity to paint to design a wall. I would have loved to have seen that, wouldn't you? As a guy who would have done something very special. If you think Puvis is special, I don't think you've seen anything to what Degas would have been. How poor is that for me to say? So on the left side too, you're seeing 2 more Degas, these with horses. This is all flat pattern making. By the way, the flatness is for the purposes of praising pattern or to playing pattern. It's not all necessarily done like a cult, the cult of flatness. It's not like that any more than the cult of realism on the right one, or the cult of impressionism, right? But and what their different ambitions are, what their different, shall we say, visual motives are. But let me just say once again, the Rosa Bonheur on the right is an example of what, and a very, very remarkable, a beautiful example of what flatness isn't, but it's also an example of what I was mentioning earlier, and that of Courbet, the work of Courbet and the mindset of that ilk when this realism thing was taking over. You're sort of stepping away from the academy at this point, and there are other people than Rosa Bonheur and Courbet, but you're trying to bring this level of realism. It's like, let the horses sound like they're running on you. Can you hear the thunders? Are they terrifying a little bit? Well, Degas isn't doing any of that. Degas is an eyeball. It's just two-dimensional eyeball. And by the way, and he talks about patterns, and he talks about spots, and Degas does, and he talks about distribution of color. Spots, this is a spot, big spot, the dark spot in the sky here, this big spot of dark, and distribution of spots. That's what I mean by spots. Light spots here, big light spot here, light spot, spot, right? Those are spots and spotting. Well, Rosa Bonheur isn't immune to that. That's very much in the world now at this point. People start saying, have gotten past all the other things that used to be done and starts talking about the aesthetic distribution of masses. This is not an unimportant event, and so post Velázquez, this is never taken for granted again. But when you're talking about flatness, I hope you can see the difference between these two paintings, and see the commonality of these four paintings. See what they have in common and how that's different from this, and different from as well from the Velázquez Impressionist work. So let's go past that now. And again, I wanted to show you some more examples of this inflated, or whatever you want to call, where they're talking about. Degas is one of those guys who just picks on people for doing this, but I'm just giving you three examples of Boston School: Benson, Zorn, and Sargent, each of which are doing not flat, right? These pictures don't convey anything like. Even though this has a flat wall in it, by the way, there are holes everywhere. The whole thing is you're riding into the background. It's in the very nature of Impressionist truth, effect-based drawing, that you will wind up with that, shall we say, problem in a case of Degas. Well, Degas gets out of it, you could argue, by simply not in this case at least, painting primarily from effects. He has what we call an effect here, but he isn't painting from the effects, from the series, from the set of the effects. Let's not make more of that for now. I've talked about that before. But I do want to talk about, and this is the comment, I'm going to stick my head in there and read it to you in case you guys can't read it, but somebody put this online. I was very pleased. It's very good contribution to what's out there. This is Degas speaking. Drawing is the probity of art. To draw does not mean simply to reproduce contours. Drawing does not consist merely of line. Drawing is also expression, the inner form, the plane, the modeling, see what remains after that. So that the modeling, the plane, that's what you see in good draftsmen. All three of these are top draftsmen, right? This is Rubens on the right, this is Degas, and the one on the left hand is Ang. So you have what we're talking about this is not a flattening. This is a 3D popping, right? This is getting all the form. And it's getting the form as much as you can also in the contour itself as you take the ride, in the fullness of the non-flattening of areas. So that's it. The combination of this plus the fullness of this, right? The gradation, the modeling of the form, and the movement of the light. So that's his production of form. So let's just listen to what he says. A picture must only, this is Degas in both cases, a picture must only be made from a study painted from nature. It's composed beforehand in your mind. The studies you've amassed are useful simply in support as valuable bits of information. So now this is in support of the fact that he's painting from nature. A picture must be made from a study painted from nature. Degas is not painting from his imagination, okay? But he has already pre-imagined, and he talks about it in one of his notebooks. He talks a little bit about ideas, pictorial, what would you call pictorial ideas, using this and that to make a picture. So he's already got ideas like that going on. But you can't miss it, right? A picture must only be made from a study painted from nature. So keep that in mind, right? He doesn't even talk about memory here. And then he says it requires courage to make a frontal attack on nature, through the broad planes and the large lines, and it's cowardly to do it by the facets and the details. So he's saying you can build up a face by a lot of little things, but can you actually block out? I don't say block is the wrong word, but can you actually attack it on its great forms? And let's back up a little bit and just have a look at these three draftsmen. But this isn't built up. These aren't noodled up shapes. These are broadly expressed great forms, right? And that's what you see in great draftsmen. That's one of those things that distinguishes the great draftsman from the accurate drawing of so many people of our time, and even I even think of Paxton rather in that way. Not hopelessly so, not by any means. So don't misunderstand me when I do that, when I say that about Paxton. So should be a clear understanding of Degas. But then Degas rarely painted from nature, according to Rothenstein. It was his custom to gather ideas for gestures and compositions as he watched the daily life about him. Now, what does that say? Ideas for gestures and compositions. Registering observations in his amazingly retentive memory and making rapid pencil notations as well. Now, follow this, guys. This is the question you're really asking. He then hired models to repeat the required gestures in his studio while he made innumerable drawings of them. Now, as I said, when you look at his drawings, he does not look like he's doing anything from memory. He looks like he's doing everything from life. An article written by one of these models, which bears an unmistakable stamp of authenticity, was published in a French periodical. Okay, so you're talking about, it was a dancer who wrote that, by the way. So you're talking about Degas bringing models in. Now, I don't know if he actually used photographs for these. It wouldn't be the biggest surprise in the world to find that he did. On the other hand, I've heard that he also had an opportunity to use a horseman, had the horseman hold still. And somewhat that's suggested by the sort of the brevity of these things, the undevelopedness of them. So, you select out a segment you're going to work on because, you're not really drawing the horse. The horse is being held still by this guy, and you're making your studies. Degas was just excellent at doing that. But bringing the model into the room, so he had the ideas in his imagination, and even the ideas themselves are coming from observant. Take the dance or the horseman, from observances of nature. He's noticed things. And some people talk about typical poses, atypical poses, and he had an eye for that, kind of an idea of significance, but he also had an eye for the random and the curious, and kind of a pose that would make for an interesting shape. And if you don't know anything about Degas, he's a guy who's interested in in shape amusement, much more than trying to live up to some ideal aesthetic standard of the human figure, right? His model, and this is where, again, you have to represent Degas right in your own mind. His model is interesting. And he's talking about interesting shapes. He's talking about interesting form and interesting relationships of these units and color and all the rest. Degas is infinitely that guy. And, there's a logical reason why he tends to lead the modern world to abstraction. And some of the rest of us, not me, to distraction. So here I'm showing you again the Boston School holes poked in pictures, and Zorn on the left. The Zorn on the left, in the middle rather, is in Boston. And this one above here is Tarbell. This is I don't know why I didn't include this earlier. This is Benson and one of his daughters. But you can see this entire thing is very, very different. Look at this whole, everything is riding into this picture. Everything is about the travel in, and you might say the space. Some people would call it atmosphere or whatever, but it really is. It really isn't any longer in these paintings, mural painting, and things are not hanging on to the flat. So if you look at that and then pop your eye to look at this world right here, this is where you're really going to see this challenging and impressive difference. And that's what you want to take note of when you're starting to talk about flatness. All right. So it's like a mural aesthetic, which people like Degas took to be something that had to do with the greater form itself. And it certainly does things to isolate an aspect of a form. And that's why it's such a disappointment in so many ways that Degas didn't get an opportunity to do a mural, because he would have been so good at it, assuming other things, assuming he's sane in other ways. I never got it done, right? Like the case of the some of the work by Leonardo not getting done. I guess that's where I should leave it. I've talked about a lot of stuff, and we haven't exhausted the day yet. So let me just fly back to the beginning quotes, and let's see if I can get it. See if there's anything I've missed, and I'll just see if I can take a quick look. Volume of figures, form, yeah. Yeah, but I would suggest, T. Ford, that you read these quotes more closely. I don't think you will believe he's saying these things. But if you have found quotes like the observer, observe and don't not observe and all that, if you've got another source for those, let us know what they are. All right. So in the meantime, let me just recommend to you the Shoptalk of Edgar Degas, and again, make that offer to you. I'll be happy to forward you a copy of this thing. I'm not going to tell you these things are brilliant copies because we've copied them, but they're somehow, I don't know how you do those kinds of transcriptions, but they often have typos in them. And so don't hold it against us too much, but we did organize it so you can have it in a reasonably close form to what Gammell was offering. And as I said, it's just an internet one. What I forgot to do, and I have to tell you, Mr. Producer, what I forgot to do is give the names of those people who contributed, and I'll do that in the next video, just so you know. All right, but again, thank you all for your donations, for your subscriptions, sharing, commenting, everything. Really appreciate it. By the way, Mr. Producer is on his way to do a significant personal event in another part of the world, and I don't know if he wants to share it, but if he lets me, I'll probably tell you about it. And he will be gone for 3 weeks, so if we have glitches in here, it can be blamed on me not having professional guidance and other things. All right, so okay, thank you very much, and we'll hope you have a good week painting.